Hi, this video is all about an introduction to sort of the enigmatic world of fossil plants. They are a crucial part of any ecosystem, obviously, and their evolution has shown some slightly odd patterns out of sync with the other patterns that we see in terms of animal evolution. Now, the very earliest land plants um, appeared in the Ordovician, but this is only through the evidence from their spores. The first time we see actual fossils of land plants growing on land are in the Silurian period. Once they started to colonize this huge ecological niche of the land, they evolved very rapidly through the Devonian, and in particular, the Carboniferous period is one where the plants became well, very different, very dominant, I suppose, in a terrestrial uh, ecosystems. Most of the plants we're familiar with today, though, are what we call the angiosperms, the flowering plants, and they actually appeared relatively recently during the Cretaceous period, and they really started to take off then through the Paleogene. The earliest land plants we find fossils of are found in the Silurian. They're really quite small, maybe only a few centimetres high, and had these sort of curious leafless stems, okay, with this sort of large sort of spongy spore-producing structure at the end. Not really that familiar in terms of the plants that we see today. As the plants started to evolve, we find the earliest ferns and spore breeding plants, the gymnosperms. Um, these have more recognisable features, trunks and leaves, both of which are features you need to be able to recognise in the fossils for your A level. But it's really the Carboniferous where we start to see plants becoming a really important part of the fossil record. This is a reconstruction of a late Carboniferous coal-forming swamp, a rainforest perhaps, where we see a huge diversity of plants, including some sort of giant trees that ended up forming the coal deposits. Some examples of fossils that we find at this time are things like the lepidodendron club moss tree, which commonly preserves its trunk. We can see the image on the left here. We also see the, again, very common because it's already buried, preservation of fossil roots, such as stigmaria that we can see at the top image here. Horsetails leave us also a good fossil record. Common stems like calamites on the right here, or the leaves you can see at the top. Ferns are in very, very common fossils from the Carboniferous, dominating really whole areas, whole forests made of these fern fossils, and you frequently find these preserved in coal deposits. Remember, at this time, flowering plants like grass didn't exist, so ground cover vegetation would be dominated by plants like these. We even find examples of fossil seeds preserved. These features reveal themselves particularly in coal mines, where you can find in the floors um, the soil that these plants grew in and the roots that were grown embedded into them. In the roofs of these, we can find tree stems, tree trunks, which can pose a bit of a hazard, to be honest, if they drop out of a mined coal seam. We see some ancient examples of plants that still live today, cycads, these cone-bearing trees, sort of peaked in the Jurassic, but still exist today. Um, Ginkgos as well, monkey puzzle trees, exist from the same period, and they're still living today. Now, plants are useful for dating, but in particular, they're useful, I think, as environmental indicator fossils. We can tell what type of environment they grew in, perhaps what type of climate they grew in. They've used to help us date, for example, the growth of the Himalayas, looking at fossilized species that grow at different altitudes, where we find those within the fossil record. So we get a good idea of the biome that these plants would have lived in, and as a result, the climate from the past. Even in more recent deposits, plants can be invaluable. Quaternary paleoclimatology, for example, is, I wouldn't say reliant, but uses extensively fossil pollen that we find in recent sediments. And it can show how plant communities change in response to climatic change. So, what we actually need to know about plants for A level is relatively limited. We need to be able to identify the different parts. But we can use these plants to give us really good indications, in particular, of changing climates from the past. Places like Joggins in Nova Scotia that we've studied for our A level, or we will study certainly in year 13. Also, the use of pollen to reconstruct climate from the Quaternary, another key part of the year 13 syllabus. Anyway, don't forget to come up with your interesting question and bring it along to class. I'll see you then.